multi-million-dollar media company. On paper, it sounded like a dream job, working in a dynamic, creative environment, crafting engaging scripts that would reach millions of viewers. In reality, it was anything but glamorous. Despite being the backbone of their content, I was barely scraping by, earning just above minimum wage. I wasn't even a full-time employee. I was a freelancer, stuck in a loose contract with no benefits, no security, and certainly no appreciation. But at the time, I needed the money, so I took whatever they gave me and kept my head down. The workload was insane, 10 fully fleshed-out scripts a day. That meant waking up at dawn, churning out ideas, structuring narratives, refining dialogues, and making sure each piece was perfectly tailored to drive engagement. Social media was an unforgiving battlefield, and the company expected every post to be a viral hit. At first, I told myself I could handle it. After all, I was passionate about storytelling. I loved crafting narratives that made people laugh, think, or feel something real. But passion alone couldn't sustain me when I was surviving on less than a livable wage and working hours that made my head spin. I remember sitting at my desk, staring at my screen, my fingers numb from typing for hours on end. There were nights when I barely got 4 hours of sleep, only to wake up and do it all over again. The pressure was unrelenting. Every script had to be perfectly structured, emotionally gripping, and optimized for engagement. If one underperformed, the blame fell squarely on me. It wasn't just the workload that was exhausting. The office itself was a war zone. The management thrived on conflict. They loved stirring the pot, creating unnecessary tension just to watch employees turn against each other. Writers, editors, and content creators were constantly pitted against one another, forced into a competitive, cutthroat environment where collaboration was frowned upon, and survival was the name of the game. I had seen colleagues get torn down in meetings, their ideas dismissed without a second thought, only for those same ideas to be repackaged and claimed by someone higher up. There were favorites, people who could do no wrong, regardless of their output. And then there were those like me, who were expendable. I tried to keep my distance, refusing to engage in their petty office politics. But that didn't mean I was safe from their mind games. Every day, I walked into an environment where people whispered behind each other's backs, where favoritism was blatant, and where creative energy was suffocated under the weight of corporate toxicity. Still, I endured it. For 6 months, I pushed myself to the breaking point, believing that if I worked hard enough, if I proved my worth, I'd eventually be recognized. I told myself, just hold on a little longer, show them what you can do. But I wasn't prepared for how cruel reality could be. There were moments, tiny cracks in the facade, where I started to realize that no matter how hard I worked, it would never be enough. I saw how management casually dismissed my contributions, how they took credit for successes while blaming others for failures. I had written a script for a campaign that went viral overnight. The engagement was through the roof. Thousands of shares, massive traffic spikes, and a direct increase in product sales. The success was undeniable. The next morning, I walked into the office feeling, for the first time, like I had made a real difference. Maybe, just maybe, this would be the turning point. Instead, during the team meeting, my name was never mentioned. The credit went to my supervisor, someone who had barely glanced at my work. He stood there, accepting praise from the CEO, talking about his creative vision and storytelling techniques. I sat there in silence, my stomach twisted in knots. That was the moment I knew. No one was ever going to give me the recognition I deserved. But I wasn't ready to give up just yet. I decided that if they weren't going to acknowledge my value, I'd make them see it another way. And that's when I made my decision. I was going to demand a raise. What happened next changed everything. I had spent 6 relentless months working for this company, pouring my heart and soul into every script I wrote. Despite the toxic environment, the impossible deadlines, and the lack of appreciation, I had convinced myself that hard work would eventually pay off. And then, something incredible happened. One of my scripts, just one out of the hundreds I had written, went insanely viral. It wasn't just a fleeting moment of success. It was a measurable, undeniable impact on the company's revenue. Their engagement skyrocketed, traffic surged, and, Most importantly, sales figures showed a direct correlation to the campaign based on my script. The data didn't lie. At first, I was elated. Finally, proof that I was more than just another disposable freelancer. I wasn't just churning out scripts, I was driving the company's success. So, I made a decision. If they wouldn't acknowledge my worth on their own, I would force them to see it. I spent days preparing my case. I pulled analytics reports, engagement graphs, sales figures, everything that demonstrated the direct impact of my work. I even compared my salary to the industry standard, showing that even with a raise, I would still be making less than I should be. I wasn't asking for an unreasonable amount. I wasn't making demands. I simply wanted fair compensation for the value I was providing. When I finally scheduled a meeting with my supervisor, my heart pounded in my chest. I had rehearsed my words a dozen times, but nothing could prepare me for what was about to happen. I walked into the office, trying to mask my nerves with confidence. I handed over my carefully compiled documents, laid out the numbers, the undeniable proof, and said, calmly, rationally, I would like to discuss the possibility of a raise. My supervisor leaned back in his chair, flipping through the pages with feigned interest. He didn't even seem surprised by the numbers. He already knew. That's when I realized they had known all along how much I was contributing. They just didn't care. His response was so casual, so indifferent, it took a moment for me to even process the words. We appreciate your contributions, but we don't believe your work has had the impact you think it has. I blinked. I had just shown him concrete evidence. I had given him irrefutable data. Yet he was dismissing me, like I was some naive intern asking for a promotion after a week on the job. I could feel my stomach twisting into knots. But I wasn't about to give up. I pressed forward, reminding him that I wasn't even asking for what I truly deserved. I was willing to continue working for less than industry standards, as long as I was compensated fairly. Silence. Then he spoke again, with that same smug, detached tone. I don't think we can move forward with you if you feel this way about your position here. I froze. Was he threatening my job? I searched his face for any sign that he was joking. He wasn't. By the time I left his office, it was already over. I had barely sat back at my desk when the email arrived. Subject, immediate contract termination. I clicked on it, my hands trembling. We regret to inform you that due to internal restructuring, your services will no longer be required, effective immediately. I felt my stomach drop. I read the words over and over again, hoping I had misinterpreted something. But it was crystal clear. They hadn't just refused my raise. They had fired me within hours of my request. My brain struggled to process the reality. Just this morning, I had been one of their most valuable content creators. Now I was nothing. I sat frozen at my desk as the realization hit me. They had been using me. I had given them everything. My creativity, my time, my energy. And the moment I asked for even a sliver of fairness, they tossed me aside like yesterday's garbage. Worse than the betrayal was the humiliation. I had no backup plan. I had nothing lined up. Just like that, I went from an overworked freelancer to an unemployed nobody. The next few months were brutal. Finding another job wasn't as easy as I had hoped. The industry was competitive, cutthroat, and I was competing against hundreds of other talented writers. Every rejection email chipped away at my confidence. Every unanswered application felt like a slap in the face. I had spent 6 months killing myself for a company that didn't give a damn about me. And now I was paying the price for believing in them. I burned through my savings faster than I expected. Bills piled up. Anxiety consumed me. I spent nights staring at the ceiling, wondering if I had made a mistake. Maybe I shouldn't have asked for that raise. Maybe I should have just kept my head down and accepted the injustice. But deep down, I knew the truth. This had never been about what I deserved. It had been about control. They had never planned to give me more, no matter how much value I brought in. And as I sat there, struggling to figure out what to do next, one thought kept gnawing at me. Was this really the end of my story? Or would fate give me one last chance to fight back? At the time, I thought I had lost everything. I thought they had won. I had no idea that 3 years later, I would stumble upon something that would turn the tables in the most unexpected way possible. Something that would make them pay for what they had done. But that's a story for another time. Years had passed. I had done my best to move on. The pain of what happened, the betrayal, the humiliation, the sheer injustice, had faded into something duller, something I had learned to live with. The wounds were still there, but they had scarred over. I had rebuilt my career, slowly, painstakingly. The financial struggles, the sleepless nights, the rejection emails that crushed me one after another, they had all shaped me into someone different. Someone who no longer needed validation from a company that had treated me like garbage. Or so I thought. Until one ordinary evening, when everything came rushing back. It started with a simple click. I had been organizing my digital files, cleaning out old accounts I hadn't touched in years. A long-forgotten Google Drive folder caught my eye, one I hadn't accessed since I was fired. For a moment I hesitated. That folder contained memories I didn't want to revisit. But curiosity won. I clicked, and what I saw made my breath catch in my throat. The folder wasn't abandoned. It was active. Extremely active. At first I thought it was some kind of mistake, some glitch. But then I checked the activity log. Multiple people, were accessing my files every single day. I stared at the names, familiar names, names of employees from my old company. They had been using my work for years. I clicked through the files, my heartbeat pounding in my ears. Everything was still there, every template, every script format, every single tool I had painstakingly created to streamline the content production process. The folder had been my personal database, a collection of my best work, meticulously organized, designed to make script writing faster, better, smoother. And they had been living off it. I checked the timestamps, hundreds of logins. They weren't just referencing the files. They were depending on them. There were over 18 employees accessing the folder regularly. Some of them were names I didn't even recognize. New hires who had never even met me, yet were using my resources as if they were company property. Because that's exactly what the company had done. They had treated my work like it belonged to them. But it didn't. It was mine. And the best part? I was still paying for the storage. I sat there, staring at the screen, the weight of the revelation pressing down on me. At first, I felt nothing but shock. Then, a slow burn started in my chest. Anger. Not just any anger, the kind that simmers deep, the kind that's been buried for years, waiting for a reason to surface. They had taken everything from me, my time, my energy, my creativity, my livelihood. And even after discarding me, they had still been feeding off my work, without my consent, without my knowledge, without ever giving me a second thought. How dare they? For the first time in years, I felt that fire again. The same fire I had felt the moment I walked out of that office, jobless and humiliated. Only this time, I had power. Because unlike them, I knew something they didn't. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. I could have screamed, could have sent an email demanding they stop using my work, could have even contacted a lawyer, but none of that would have been satisfying. No, if I was going to do this, I was going to do it right. I had been powerless back then, but not anymore. So I started planning. First, I downloaded everything, every single file they had been using, not because I needed them, but because I wanted proof. Then, I checked their most recent activity. Some of them had been actively working on projects using my templates, my formatting guides, my resources, right at that very moment. I could almost picture the chaos that would unfold if, suddenly, all of it were to disappear. And then, with the smallest, most satisfying smirk, I did what I should have done years ago. I deleted everything. I imagined it vividly. Tomorrow morning, they would log in, expecting everything to be in place, their templates, their resources, their work, and instead, nothing. A completely empty drive, a void where their entire production workflow used to be. Panic would set in immediately. Managers screaming, employees scrambling, frantic messages flying back and forth. They would search desperately for a backup, some sort of safety net. But there was none, because all this time, I had been their safety net, and they had never even realized it. I closed my laptop, exhaling slowly. For years I had carried this anger, this unresolved injustice. But tonight I had taken back what was mine. No more bitterness, no more resentment, just satisfaction. Because in the end, they had never really fired me. They had needed me, even when I was gone. And now they would finally understand what it meant to lose me. The sun rose like any other day. But for them, it was the beginning of a disaster. Somewhere in that cold, lifeless office, a team of overworked, underpaid employees sat down at their desks, ready to start another soul-crushing day. Coffee cups in hand, bleary-eyed from another late night of churning out scripts, they powered on their computers, preparing to access their most critical files. But something was wrong. The first few clicks brought nothing but error messages. They tried again, and again. Still nothing. Panic set in. Confused murmurs filled the air. Some double-checked their internet connections. Others refreshed their browsers, convinced that the system must have been temporarily down. Then, reality hit. The realization swept through the office like wildfire. Everything was gone. The folders, the templates, the master documents, the carefully structured script formats that kept their entire workflow running smoothly, erased. The first real scream came from the content manager. It was raw, filled with sheer desperation. Where the hell are the files? The others swarmed around, clicking frantically, their expressions shifting from confusion to dread. These weren't just old, forgotten files. They were active projects, campaigns that had been scheduled for launch, scripts that had been in mid-production, high-priority content that executives were expecting by the end of the day. The entire team went into meltdown. Slack messages exploded. Emails flew in every direction. Managers called IT, demanding answers, but there were no answers. Because there was no backup. No one had ever thought about backing up those files. Because why would they? They had never considered the possibility of losing them. After all, they thought they owned them, but they didn't. They never had. The real horror began when they put the pieces together. Someone finally remembered. The drive didn't belong to the company. It had never been theirs. It had belonged to me. The moment that realization hit, true panic erupted. People scrambled to find a way out. Could they recover the files? Could they contact Google? Could they somehow restore what was lost? But no matter how many support tickets they submitted, how many IT specialists they called, the answer was the same. The files were permanently deleted. Gone. The air grew suffocatingly tense. The CEO was alerted within minutes. And when they found out, I could only imagine the look on their face. Years of effortless reliance on my work suddenly torn away in the blink of an eye. I knew it was coming before my phone even lit up. The company, the same one that had discarded me without hesitation, was now scrambling to find me. Emails poured in. Subject, urgent. Please contact us. Subject, immediate assistance required. I ignored them. The phone calls started next. Unknown numbers. Multiple attempts. Then texts. Hey, we need to talk. There seems to be a problem with some files that were on your old drive. Can you help us recover them? We're sure this is just a misunderstanding. Let's discuss a solution. A misunderstanding? They had taken from me for years without a second thought. They had used my work, my intellectual property, my creativity, without giving me credit, without paying me a dime, without even acknowledging that I was the one who built their system from the ground up. And now, standing in the rubble of their self-inflicted disaster, they were reaching out to me. The sheer audacity. I smiled, set my phone down, and let the messages pile up. Some might think I should have been angry, that I should have relished their suffering, wallowed in their panic. But the truth? I wasn't angry anymore. I had already won. I had taken back what was mine. This wasn't about revenge. It was about restoring balance. They had gotten away with exploiting me for far too long. I had let them walk all over me, let them control my future, let them dictate my worth. Not anymore. I was in control now. And they were nothing without me. What happened to them after that day? Well, the damage was irreversible. Deadlines were missed, contracts were breached, clients grew impatient, frustrated, some even pulled out of deals. The higher-ups, of course, panicked. Rumors swirled, staff were blamed, some were even fired for the incident. But no matter how many people they scapegoated, it didn't change the truth. They had built their empire on stolen foundations. And when those foundations crumbled, so did everything else. Their brand lost credibility, their content lost momentum, and eventually, they faded into irrelevance. The world moved on, and so did I. I never looked back. I didn't need to. Because for the first time in years, I felt free. I had walked away from a place that had tried to diminish me, and yet, I was the one who thrived. They had tried to erase me, but in the end, I erased them. Not out of spite, not out of hatred, but because I had something they never did: integrity. And that was worth more than anything they had ever stolen from me. If there's one thing I've learned, it's this: never let someone tell you that you're replaceable. They may not see your worth, but one day, they'll feel your absence, and when they do, it will be too late. 3 years ago, they dismissed me. They saw me as replaceable, insignificant, just another cog in their machine. They believed that the moment I walked away, they would move on without missing a step. That I was nothing more than a name on a contract, a freelancer easily forgotten. But they were wrong. Because even after they discarded me, they were still relying on me, on my work, on my ideas, on the very foundation that I had built for them, piece by piece, without recognition, without fair pay, without respect. And when that foundation was taken away, they crumbled. Not because of revenge, not because of malice, but because they had built their empire on something that was never truly theirs to begin with. I used to wonder if I had been too harsh. If maybe I should have given them a warning, a chance to fix their mistakes. But then I remember the countless nights I spent doubting myself, the exhaustion that weighed down my body, the way they stole my work, my time, my energy without a second thought, and suddenly I feel no guilt, only clarity. I was never the problem. They were. This isn't just my story. It's the story of countless people who have given their best, only to be undervalued. Of those who have worked tirelessly, only to be discarded the moment they ask for what they deserve. And if there's one thing I've learned, it's this: never let anyone convince you that you are replaceable. Because the truth is, people who truly add value are never easily replaced. They might try, they might pretend they can function without you, but one day they'll feel your absence. And when they do, it will already be too late. If they don't respect you when you're there, let them suffer when you're gone. Now, I turn to you. If you were in my position, would you have done the same? Would you have erased the files? Taken back what was yours? Or would you have given them another chance? Tell me, was I right to do what I did? Or would you have walked away, leaving the past untouched? Let's talk. I want to know, what would you have done?